Good evening, ladies. I hope that you're doing well tonight. Hope you've had a good day. I think that Monday night may be a night that works really well for me because the house is finally quiet after it not having been quiet all day, and people are kind of off in their own corners doing their own thing, and that's a good thing. Anyway, I wanted to pop in here tonight a little bit and talk about a different kind of frenzy. You know, we've been talking about home frenzy, and that's what we focus on most of the time, but there's other kinds of frenzy besides the home frenzy. And tonight I want to talk about the internal frenzy, and specifically I want to talk about the negative voices that are frequently in our head. Now, I think most of us have an internal voice in our head. There may be some women out there who don't have negative voices in their head, but honestly, I've never met one. Everybody I've ever talked to for any length of time has usually opened up and said, yeah, there's internal voices in their head. And it's kind of interesting, usually those voices, they say things to us like, you're not whatever enough. For example, they'll say, you're not smart enough. You're not young enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not thin enough. Whatever it is, you're not enough of that. Or on the other side, they'll say, you're too much of something. You're too bossy. You're too opinionated. You're too selfish. And these voices tend to speak to us at absolutely the worst times. They speak to us as we are thinking about starting something new. And that's when the voice will say, you're not smart enough to do that. Or perhaps we'd think we'll draw some boundaries or start a new hobby or do something for ourselves. And that's when the voice says things like, you're too selfish. It's interesting. That little voice inside of us is always comparing us to somebody else or to something, and we always come on the short end of the stick, don't we? Very seldom does that inner voice say, yeah, you can do that. You're smart enough. You're young enough. Take that time for yourself. That little internal voice doesn't generally do that, unfortunately. Now, the little voice inside of our head frequently started with somebody in our past, and usually somebody who loved to criticize. And frequently they love to criticize us for our own good. How many of us have heard that, right? I just need to tell you this for your own good. Well, I've read a lot of stuff about internal voices and dealing with those. And one of the most interesting things I read said to give that voice a name and tell it to sit down and shut up. Well, I'm going to be honest here. I've had several negative voices in my past, but one in particular, very negative voice that really did a number on me. And so I named this voice Ronnie. And every now and then I have to tell Ronnie to sit down and shut up, that the things he whispers in my ear and says about me are not true. Now, does this mean that all feedback that we get that's negative should be ignored? Because let's face it, sometimes we're going to get feedback from people, even people that we love, that's not really what we want to hear. And it doesn't mean that we should just discount everything that, that we don't like. After all, none of us are perfect. None of us walk on the water. And sometimes we all need to hear a truth, whether it's really something that we wanted to hear or not. And hopefully we have friends and family who will speak truth to us even when maybe it's not what we wanted to hear. And if we've got those people, we're very lucky. But then we have to ask ourselves, okay, how do we differentiate between the types of feedback? And there really are two main types of feedback. And actually they are criticism, and the other one is teaching. And they differ in three ways. They differ in tone and intent and in the effect. Now, one type of feedback is all about seeing you grow and develop and become better. That's teaching. The other type is all about tearing you down and making you feel like you can't, making you feel small. That's criticism. One is all about you. That's teaching. The other type of feedback is all about that other person. That's criticism. And one type of feedback leaves you feeling respected, and the other type leaves you feeling disrespected. Now, hopefully, teaching is has an it should have a positive intent, a positive tone, and then has a positive effect. Criticism, you can tell because it has a negative intent, a negative tone, and a negative effect. However, this is just one part of the equation. The other part is how we receive the message. Okay? You have to ask yourself about the tone. Ask yourself, how was I handled? How did this other person speak to me? How did they handle me? Were you handled gently? Were you handled with respect? Was it something that was positive? And if the intent and the tone were both positive, but the effect was negative, in other words, we took it in a negative way, even though the intent was positive, the tone was positive, but we took it the wrong way, that's where we kind of need to do a little self-examination and ask ourselves, why? Why did we take that experience as a negative one when obviously the intent was positive, the tone was positive? What was there about it or about us that made us receive that in a negative way? Maybe we're too sensitive. I've been guilty of that more than once. We need to ask ourselves, have I been beaten down or gotten so much bad feedback in the past that it's very difficult for me to be objective about feedback? Do I have my shields up? Is my armor on? We need to ask ourselves why. The other piece to this, though, is what's called the readiness of the receiver. That plays a big part in how we interpret feedback. And sometimes a negative tone and a negative intent can still, interestingly enough, have a positive effect. And you've all seen this, and you've probably all experienced it. Someone tells you something that you don't want to hear, that's not meant for your own good, it's not meant to be helpful, it's meant to tear you down, but your reaction to it becomes one of, I'll show you. In other words, sometimes that negative tone and negative intent can actually have a positive effect because we use it as motivation. It came, for whatever reason, at the right time that we realized, I'm going to make a change, and by golly, I'll show you that you're wrong. Sometimes that can be something that's very positive and moves us forward and takes us a long way. And it's kind of nice every now and then to show the person who is intent to tear you down, to show them that you can come, rise above all of that. So we have to kind of look at the voices in our head and examine what they're telling us, why they're telling us something. Think about the tone, the intent, what the purpose is. And sometimes we need to tell those voices to sit down and shut up because they're wrong. Sometimes we need to also remember these things when we're giving feedback to other people, because we're all in positions. If you're a mother, an employee, a wife, a daughter, you're going to be in positions too, we all are, where we're having to give feedback to other people. And while we don't ever want a Ronnie in our life tearing us down and telling us we can't do things and being negative and handling us with disrespect, we also don't want to be a Ronnie for somebody else either. And so that's something for us to keep in mind as we're providing feedback and comments and things to other people as well. So those were just some thoughts I had. Like I said, I had read some of this in a book, and it really struck a chord with me. I think most women have dealt with negative voices probably much more than they have needed to or wanted to. And, unlike the other types of frenzy, you can, with home frenzy, you can get your house organized, you can declutter, you can get it taken care of. With work frenzy, you can change jobs, you can do something else. With people frenzy, you can draw boundaries or you can sever relationships. But the problem with internal frenzy is kind of like they say, wherever you go, there you are. So that internal frenzy sometimes is really difficult for us to deal with, and we have to be very conscious of the things we're saying to ourselves and how we're working to calm that internal frenzy that we had. So those were just some thoughts I had about the internal frenzy and the negative voices. I would encourage you to give your negative voice a name and determine when you need to tell it to sit down and shut up and to leave you alone. Because my feeling is this: you are enough. You are smart enough. You are capable enough. You are young enough. All of those things. You are enough. And we need to all take those messages and internalize the message that we are enough to do the things that we want to achieve, to use our God-given gifts the best we can, and make a positive impact. So those were my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts, your comments, if internal frenzy is something you deal with, how you deal with it. I think internal frenzy is the hard one. Anyway, those were just my thoughts, and I appreciate you coming and spending a little bit of your time with me this evening. If you catch this in the replay later, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and y'all have a great evening, and go tame a little bit of your frenzy. I'll talk to you later. If you found value in this video, I would appreciate it if you would leave me a comment or give me a thumbs up, or better yet, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Share it with your friends, and I would love to have you come visit me over at the blog. You can find me at tamingfrenzy.com, or you can find me at Facebook, which is where I hang out most of the time.